Good evening, everyone. I'm Clarice Razaz Sharif. I'm the Senior Director of Literary Programs at PEN America, and it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to our edition of PEN Out Loud with Pamela Paul and Lauren Oyler. Pamela Paul is the editor of a New York Times book review and oversees books coverage at the New York Times. She's also the host of a weekly book review podcast. She's the author of 6 books, including The Starter Marriage and The Future of Matrimony, and How to Raise a Reader, co-written with Maria Russo. Lauren Oyler is an author and editor. Her essays and criticism appear regularly in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The London Review of Books, Harper's Book Forum, and other publications. Her first novel, Figure Counts, is on sale now. The links for the full bios are in the chat. So welcome everyone from wherever you're tuning in. I'd like to also offer my special thanks to our series partners, the Strand Bookstore, as well as Scripps Presents, the public programming series at Scripps College in Claremont, California. We also want to thank ProBono ASL for providing interpretation, including tonight's interpreters, Selena Flowers and Dee Herrera. PEN America's mission is to unite writers and readers to celebrate creative expression and the freedom to write for all. PEN Out Loud is a year-round conversation series featuring a diversity of voices, authors, poets, journalists, artists, and activists. Next week, we'll close the season with a conversation between Sandra Cisneros and Jaime Manrique. Tickets are still available. Join us if you can. But tonight, let's turn to tonight's event. We're here to celebrate Pamela Paul and her latest book, 100 Things We've Lost to the Internet. Pamela takes us readers on a nostalgic tour of a pre-internet age and offers powerful insights into both the profound and the seemingly trivial things we've lost. Some of my favorite things in this book, Things We've Lost: penmanship, I'm guilty; sick days, yes; a good night's sleep, I'm dreaming about it right now, but I could go on. But let's come back to my script, go buy the book, buy many copies and give them as gifts. In fact, while you're at it, pick up Lauren's book as well. So following the conversation, Lauren Oyler will moderate a brief Q&A. Please use the Q&A box to submit your questions. Let's get started. We are delighted to help celebrate the pub day of 100 things we've lost to the internet. Thanks again for joining us. Please help me welcome Pamela Paul and Lauren Oyler. Have a good night.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here, but a little bit nervous to be with a professional interviewer. I was wondering if you had any tips.
Well, I professionally interviewed you, so I felt like it was only fair that you get to turn the tables on me.
And do you prefer? What side do you prefer?
I prefer to be the interviewer. So you are in the power position here. I would much rather ask questions than answer them.
Well, but I could, I could ruin it at any moment. That's the big fear, but I hope that I don't. So I was wondering, so the book is really also, here's the book, 100 Things We've Lost to the Internet. And for people who haven't had a chance to look at it, because it just came out today, it consists of 100 quite short essays about different things that we have lost to the internet, and they sort of range from the kind of things that Clarice was talking about, like getting a good night's sleep, penmanship. I also have terrible penmanship, to sort of like emotional states and sort of more sort of existential, spiritual questions. But I wanted to start by asking how the book came about. Like, when did you start working on it? Was it always going to be in this form, like as an essay collection, or were you thinking more abstractly?
Well, it's funny. I don't actually think of it as an essay collection. I think of it as 100 really short chapters. I think there's one chapter that's 1 sentence long. So I didn't think about it that way. But where I started was thinking about I've been writing as a journalist, although I don't really report more or write that much in my current, given my current day job. But before that, I had a column for a long time for the style section of the New York Times that looked at various studies. And the studies were often, they're academic studies, often about the intersection of technology and everyday life. And I felt like that thread had run throughout a lot of the writing that I've done. And when I look at most of the books that I've done, with some exceptions, like the memoir and How to Raise a Reader, most of them are looking at aspects of consumer culture and the way in which people interact with consumer culture. And technology really is, fundamentally, the internet is a consumer product and service. And all of the apps that we download and all the websites we go to, they're all trying to make money off of us. And we are kind of sold on these forms of a technology. And it's really interesting for me to think about, how is it that we interact with all of this technology? And a lot of what we spend time thinking about as journalists and just as humans on this planet are, what is happening right now? And what does that mean for my future? Like, what is happening right now with Facebook and Instagram and all the studies that are coming out? And what does that mean? Or what is this thing, Venmo? And should I be using it? And is it better than Zelly? We're sort of constantly moving forward and thinking, like, how do we need to iterate, upgrade, reframe our thinking vis-a-vis these technologies that are constantly coming at us? And then sometimes we think, like, wait a minute, how did we get here? Like, how did this thing become so ubiquitous? What we don't do, I think, as often is kind of pause and reflect and say, like, wait, what did we used to do before this? So I'll just give an example, which is, we're now still in pandemic times. Most of us who can work at home are working remotely, and we've adopted all of these new habits. And I don't know about you, but I have been back to my office. And when I go to my office, it seems really weird. Like, that's not the normal anymore. That is the awkward situation. Like, there was a week recently where I went into the office 3 days in a row. And I felt to my core, like, this is insanity. How did I used to do this all the time? It's this new habit that we've formed, right? And it's hard to remember, like, oh, wait, I used to do this every single day. This used to be the way it was. And so I kind of wanted to do that, to sort of strip the technology out of everyday life, out of all the various ways in which we use it, and think, wait, what is it that we used to do? Like, what did we do before we could, Google map everything, or before we could pay anyone instantly, or before you could, take a screenshot? Like, you always have, for example, your ticket on you, always, whether it's a plane or a concert. So I was like, wait, what used to happen? Like, we used to lose our tickets. We used to forget them at home, and there was no recourse. You'd be like screwed. So I wanted to kind of step back and remember, what is all of that? Because getting to this idea of consumer culture and the fact that technology is sold to us, it's a product that we don't necessarily have to buy. I mean, sometimes we really want it. But we can also sort of think a little bit more reflexively about, like, is this actually better? Was there another way? And then, for me, obviously, and I think you are slightly younger than me, Lauren, which is one of the reasons I'm so eager to talk to you. For me, I very much remember that earlier era, but there are a lot of digital natives out there who have no recollection of these things. They don't remember the before times. And I'll use just one anecdote. This doesn't have to do with the internet specifically, but this is just a technology. And I think demonstrates for me many of the ways in which, this would hold true for many internet things. And that is, one day recently, I was with my 16-year-old daughter. And like most people, I have like several sets of keys for the car. And then there's that one loser key that you have when you get a car that's like the key that has no fob on it, It's just a key on a ring. And I couldn't find the other keys with the actual like beeper remote thing. I don't even know what it's called. So I went out with the key and I opened up the door with the key. And my daughter was dumbstruck. She was like, you can open up a car with a key? Like, it never occurred to her that this was actually possible. And I think that's true for so much of internet technology. For digital natives, like, they don't know what it was like before. This to them is like the stickball in the streets of Brooklyn that my dad's, childhood was to me.
Yeah. And I think too, so I was just having a coffee with one of my friends from college. So we're both 31 years old. And we were talking about how you can use your phone to swipe into the subway now and you don't have to have your Metro card anymore. And we were talking about how we're both terrified of actually signing up for this, even though it's much more convenient and much more sort of like, you don't ever have to worry about losing your Metro card. I'm always putting my Metro card in my pocket and I'm losing it. But I think for me at least, and I think a lot of millennials around my age as well, have this kind of like, we have our foot in both worlds, right? We're not necessarily we're not digital natives, but we're not really, we can still remember when we got the internet, and when we got, when we sort of learned that you could like Google things, and maybe when we sort of surpassed our own parents' knowledge of the internet. Whereas I think, but I also simultaneously have this feeling of having showed up really late to the party. And maybe that's because I sort of idealized the 90s as if maybe at that time that would have been more fun in every way. And I really just sort of feel like I showed up and everything was kind of over. It surely doesn't help that
the 90s was actually really fun.
Well, everybody was
there.
They were like, yeah, my boyfriend is 40 and he's always like, you should have been there. It was great, but often you would have to, as you write about in the book, your friend wouldn't show up for dinner and you would be like, why hasn't my friend showed up for dinner? Are they okay? Why are they 30 minutes late? So I wanted to ask about the notion of lost and loss, right? Because I think when I first saw the title of the book, I thought like, oh, this is going to be sort of mournful and it's going to be suggesting that this is all necessarily bad. But you're quite careful to say that it's not, all of this isn't necessarily bad. A lot of it is quite good. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the entries where you sort of determine like, good riddance, we've made some real progress.
Yeah, I mean, like most things, it's complicated, right? I mean, again, thinking back to the pandemic, when we first had lockdown, can you imagine what it would have been like without the internet? It would have just been a total disaster. We had access to health information. We had access, we could connect with our friends and our loved ones and our colleagues. For those of us who were lucky enough to have jobs that could be done remotely, that meant we could continue to kind of earn a living. We could still show up in certain ways to places. We had access to news and information. If we had not had the internet, like, I don't know how the New York Times would have kept going. I don't know how many places would have kept going. And that's just, and that's not life or death. Like there were life or death reasons to have the internet. So there's obviously a lot of really good things to the internet. And it's funny because I was about, a good chunk into writing this book and researching this book when lockdown happened. And it was like, uh-oh, something here has occurred. What does this mean for my idea? And at first I thought, well, now everyone's going to think the internet is totally fabulous. And it is. But then once life became purely internet, I think we also started to notice like, there are some downsides to being entirely internet all the time. Like there are downsides to going to work and being in a Zoom and for every meeting. There are downsides certainly for kids going to school. Anyone who had any kind of child in their life, whether they were a teacher or a school administrator or a school psychologist or a special ed teacher or a child or a parent, saw just how diminished the experience was socially, emotionally, and in terms of education for children in a classroom. Every age level, like if you think about a kindergartner who's learning really important social and emotional skills, like they're completely deprived of that. And kindergartners can't sit still and stare at a screen all the time. Like it's hard enough to find like, a 2-hour movie that they can sit through at that age. And then just think about like what it was like for middle school and high school. Some of it, again, is sort of light and frivolous, but like, how do you flirt with someone? Like in a Zoom, how do you meet someone new? How do you have a side conversation? So there was just so much that was flattened by the internet. So again, I think it's thinking about those contradictions. And I also didn't want this book to be entirely like, this is my take. Like a lot of people have experiences online that are quite different from my own. So for example, when you think about the fact that you're never the only one online, that's one of the chapters, like being the only one. And so being the only one can be horrible. And it also can be great. It can make you feel unique and interesting. You could be like, I am the only person in the world who hand stitches logos of detergents from the 40s. But no, you'll find out online there are 40 other people, and then you'll be like, I am not so special. However, if you are a gender fluid teenager trying to come to terms with your identity and you're living in a very conservative town in rural Iowa with a family that doesn't accept you and a community that feels really frightening, then being able to connect online with teenagers going through similar things is hugely powerful, and to be able to find your community. So with all of these things, I tried to see it from perspectives different from my own, because, and also, you know, quite frankly, even for each of us, like sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, like sick days, which Clarice brought up in the introduction. You know, it really sucks not to be able to take a sick day and to lie in bed all day long feeling like, yay. I mean, not yay because you're sick, but it's kind of nice to have a sick day too every once in a while if you're not feeling completely horrible. Now you don't really get a sick day because you have to check in. And so that feels like a total negative. On the other hand, if you are out sick for a few days and you come back to the office and you have so much work sitting there waiting for you, it is kind of nice to be like, you know what, like during those moments where I kind of feel okay, I can at least clear the decks of like some of the emails that have come in and just kind of in a low key taking care of things so that I don't feel quite as inundated and dread getting back to the office. So, you know, I do feel like with each thing, there are positives and negatives.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering while we were talking more about the pandemic, do you think that there would have been a lockdown at all if we didn't have the internet? Like, I don't even, you know, when you started talking, I was like, I don't even know that I think that that would have happened.
You'd be like, we have to cancel this here pandemic.
They would be like,
Not
well, you gotta
okay.
go to work, right? Like,
yeah.
yeah.
I don't know.
In Europe, they would have had one, but they barely have the internet.
Right.
In
Europe, it would have been like the pandemic is a 35-hour pandemic, you know, a week pandemic. And and there's paid non-pandemic time. No, I mean, I don't know what it would have been like. There's so many hypotheticals. You know, I even think about like, one of the things I feel like has gone away entirely is being completely disconnected, which is something that I did a lot as a teenager and when I was in my 20s. I think back to a time when I was 23 and I went to China for 6 weeks by myself. I had $15 budget a day and I backpacked through Xinjiang province in Western China and went like all the way up through Beijing. I was by myself. Sometimes it was a little bit, you know, dodgy or sketchy because I really was sleeping kind of in not luxurious hotels, and traveling all by myself. And my parents had no idea where I was. I didn't even have a calling card, you know, and calling long distance was too expensive. And I think back to that and I think, I don't know that I could let go of my own child, you know, even when they're 23 and be like, oh, that's okay. You just go do that. Just go risk your life and travel in a remote area of a country halfway across the planet. And yet, theoretically, you could do it, right? You could just not bring a phone, but who does that?
Well,
Right?
this is
Like
what
we're so habituated.
yeah, well, I was reading, I like those parts when you were talking about traveling because I love traveling as well. And I used to travel a lot by myself. And I was wondering if, I don't know. So when I was traveling by myself, I can't even remember if I had a phone, right? But it would have been like 8, 9, 10 years ago, when I was doing it more. And now I'm like less adventurous and sort of like more sort of judicious about where I stay and, you know, like not doing the absolute cheapest thing. And I was wondering if maybe some of that is just, you know, when you're 23, you want to go on an adventure and you don't really think about like staying in these hostels or like not, you know, people not knowing where you are, or you might like that people don't know where you are because maybe, you know, you could still do it. But it would require like turning off, right? And now the only kind of people who, you know, disconnect or go phone free or whatever tend to be like tech gurus and
Right.
like Silicon Valley people, right? But yeah, and I liked also the chapter about the Spanish English dictionary, right? So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that because I'm always learning German, but I use Google Translate to translate, like if I need a vocabulary word or something, and I sort of feel that I'm not learning the vocabulary word as well because it's in this like interface that I think of as Google. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think about language all the time, all the time. And I too like to learn languages or at least brush up on the ones that I half know. And I think back to, again, when I was in my early 20s, I moved to Thailand and I remember I like had used these tapes, okay, like cassettes. So I'm dating myself, that were like developed. The Thai language is not a popular second language generally in America. And so they were like military tapes. And the questions they would teach me were like, where is the airfield? And like, I was like, I'm never going to need this, but I do need to know, like, I don't eat red meat. So I learned the word for chicken. And I remember being very proud of myself going to a restaurant and being like, gai plow. And they would come back and serve me an egg omelet on top of rice. What I thought I had said was chicken on rice, but it was an egg on rice. And I did it like several times. I went to chicken restaurants with chickens hanging in front of them. And because like these are sort of roadside restaurants, and I would ask for my chicken with rice and I'd always get an egg on top of rice. And that's because I was mispronouncing it. And I'm sure that if I had like a Google Translate, like I could have seen, oh, I'm saying my G too much like a K, which is the problem. Kai is egg and guy is chicken. I would have immediately recognized that. And then, sad thing, I actually would never have gotten the egg on rice, which turns out was one of my favorite things to eat there. Like, who knew? I never would have ordered an omelet on rice, but it turns out it was really delicious. And I think about, just sometimes the crazy ways in which we try to communicate with one another when we're speaking different languages. Like, just all of that is lost. Like, a lot of fun things happen when you are quote unquote talking to someone and you don't actually speak their language. Right. But now you can get past that. You can like type it into your device and just show it to the person. And then they're like, oh, the bathroom's that way. But, if you hadn't had that, like there could have been a whole different way of communicating. I mean, we have the great benefit here of being translated into ASL. You like learn really homespun bad sign language when you're trying to communicate with someone not knowing their language. But again, we've kind of lost those magic moments. I think there's something, again, you could say there's a positive to it because we can all learn to talk to one another now. But there's some kind of mystery and serendipity that I think goes away at the same time.
Right. And do you think of the internet as a homogenizing force?
Oh gosh, I think it is a homogenizing force in certain ways, but I think it's homogenizing in a multiplicity, like in a multiverse, right? So it depends on what echo chamber you're in, and then it homogenizes within that chamber. So, one of the things that is so, I think, positive and negative about the internet is that you enter into your own chamber, right? That you have self-selected the world that you're going to. You've selected the websites that you're going to. You have selected in social media the people you're going to hear from, and it begins to color and frame your world. So sometimes, like, I'll go on Twitter and I'll be like, everyone here is talking about books. It's so great that we live in this incredibly literary culture. My entire feed is about books. And of course, that's because I have self-selected the universe in which I operate. And meanwhile, the rest of the world is talking about like NASCAR and Beyonce and Biden and like all different things that, are occurring around the world in their own, little microcosms. And I do think, though, that once you're in those, that you quickly find that any opinion that doesn't necessarily conform to like a current bubble of accepted opinion within your, chosen vacuum, then I think there is a kind of flattening and homogenizing force there.
Yeah. And do you feel also, I mean, because you are the editor of the New York Times Book Review, you are not using Twitter or Instagram the way that a sort of free agent with nothing to lose by tweeting their opinions about Flaubert or, their sort of controversial take about Sally Rooney does, right? So I was wondering if, basically what I want to ask is, why do you have Twitter at all? Do you feel like you have to have it?
I don't feel like I have to have it, but I do actually enjoy it in a limited way. I do feel, first of all, I want to say, like, I don't think any of us is entirely free on Twitter, right?
No.
I mean, unless you're a complete troll, like most people do have communities that they feel responsible to, and they are, and that they respond to emotionally, intellectually. And, I do think that the internet comes for us all one day, like everyone at some point in their life is going to say something wrong, and it could just be a typo, or it could have been like a bad night's sleep or whatever it is. And you will come under attack, or at least criticism for something that you do. It's definitely true that, in my current job at the Times, I certainly I don't review books myself at the Times because I'm sort of overseeing the people who have the opinions. And I don't like to, sort of promote anything negative on Twitter. But I think that's kind of general. It's so easy to complain online. Complaining is so much fun. And studies have shown, there's a little bit about this in the book, that negativity gets a better response. So the incentive is there. And that's a kind of interesting thing to think about. But I try not to indulge that. It's hard though. It's hard.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard. And I'm constantly like changing my strategy for being online when I would really just prefer to maybe not be there. But I do really feel there are lots of interesting ideas about missing out in this book. But I've sort of, I don't actually feel that I'm missing out if I go off Twitter or something, but I worry that I will feel that I'm missing something if I go offline. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And then, but then and I think this is a challenge for journalists too, or anyone who's sort of following the culture is, we do have to remember, like, Twitter is not the real world. And sometimes, again, because you're in a bubble, you'll be like, everyone is talking about this. Everyone is upset about this. And you'll go off and you'll see someone in real life and you'll be like, aren't you upset about X? And they're like, what are you talking about? I have no idea what it is you're discussing. So, I do think that we have to kind of keep that perspective.
Yeah. And so I wanted to ask you a lot of questions about the book review, but appropriately, it's 125th anniversary this year, and you guys have been doing lots of sort of celebratory content. And I was wondering how you have tried to sort of adjust the book review to the internet since you started as editor-in-chief in 2013. Is that right?
Yeah. I don't know that we've tried to adjust the content of the book review to the internet, but the internet infuses everything culturally, right? And it informs the books that are written and the ways in which they're written. I mean, you, Lauren, and I think it's behind me. Nope, it's that way. There's her novel. We have written what some people refer to as like an internet novel. Although it's, I'm sure it's more and less than that. It's different from that. It's not just an internet novel, but it's responsive to this technology, and it's about this technology. And we at the book review then obviously are going to cover it. But the internet has changed, I think, more the way in which we present our journalism to our audience and the way in which we reach those audiences. So that's really the main effect that the internet has had on the book review like itself. I mean, fundamentally, what we're doing has remained the same, which is that we are reviewing books and we're trying to get interesting voices and a range of diverse voices to weigh in on books, not to shout them down, not to say they're great because I love this message or I love this author, but to find people who will honestly and we hope, in an authentic way and an interesting way, engage with a text and present it to readers and let them make their own judgment.
Right. And I think the New York Times is kind of interesting because it's really one of the last major national publications that doesn't have, is there any web only content that the Times does, but you guys don't?
Yes. We do. I mean, well, first of all, so there's the book review, right? Which is a kind of, and then there's the book's desk, which has daily critics on it. We have news and features and profiles, and we do a lot of service journalism that is often online only.
Right.
It's funny because I don't necessarily think of things as online only or in print, like things. We create them, frankly, digitally first, and then they find their way into a print section of the paper. And sometimes it's not in the book review. Sometimes it's in the art section, or it might be in the national section if it's about, something that's happening at a bookstore in Chicago, for example, or it might be in the international section if it has to do with an author in France, for example. So but there is some content there is more and more content that is online only because of the way in which it's presented. And so, what you see in the New York Times book review in print on Sunday, all of that is online, but not everything that you see online is necessarily in the book review.
Right. Do you feel, so there are several chapters here about various kinds of print media. There's a chapter on magazines, there's a chapter on the paper. There's also, what else is there? There's a chapter on letters to the editor as well. And I'm wondering if you see or agree with the idea of an opposition between print media and books in particular and the internet. Like, do you think they're at odds? Are they going to destroy each other?
Oh gosh, no. I mean, video didn't kill the radio star, right? So I don't think they're going to kill each other. In fact, I think that books, and I think we saw this in the pandemic, are often the antidote to the internet in a way. I mean, it's like, if you sit down online, right, you can kind of like Google away and go down various rabbit holes and have a really good time. And at the end of it, you'll be like, wait a minute, what the hell have I been doing for the last 55 minutes?
Yeah.
Like, this hour is gone. And I was actually and I think that those of us who are readers crave like a deeper narrative, a more immersive experience than that kind of constant flurry, jittery thing that we do so often online. I mean, I think usually I have two different computers open during the day, my work day and my phone. And cumulatively, between all my tabs, I probably have like between 20 and 30 windows open at any given time onto any source of information or entertainment. And books, it's really entering fully into a world. And I think that's why books did well, actually, during the pandemic, because they served as this kind of deeper, more, a deeper and a more sustained source of attention and a kind of storytelling that I think that human beings really enjoy.
Yeah. And do you have any idea? So this year there were a lot of books about the internet. Like, it was like all of a sudden, and obviously most of us, you as well mentioned this in your introduction, we started writing them before the pandemic. It was like, we didn't plan it, but this year was the year that everybody was on the internet, and there were, a bunch of, as you said, internet novels, and also this book, and a lot of sort of also reported nonfiction about various aspects of the internet. And I wonder if you have any idea why that might be.
Well, as you said, books move slow. And I think most of us were probably working on these books, anywhere between 2 and 5 years out. And I think, again, that's what I think makes books so enduring and different from the internet. Like, we're taking our time. We're thinking about those words, and they're not just 140 characters or 280 characters or whatever the current limit is. And we are editing our words and fact checking them, and we are having other people read them, and we're contemplating them, and we are writing about it at length. And I think that's why, so those books like gestated for a long time, they marinated. And I think that's why they then work as well as they do. I mean, there's a reason why books like yours and Patricia Lockwood's No One Is Talking About This, and Sally Rooney's Beautiful World, Where Are You? And all the books that have come out recently about, what has the internet done to politics, democracy, elections, the economy, the, employer, sort of the workforce, all of those things, capitalism, et cetera. Those were things that people were thinking about for a long time. And I think that's one of the reasons why they speak to us so well, is that the authors of those books sort of had some time to kind of sit back and actually think about it, stop reacting, and actually respond.
Yeah. Do you feel like it has changed the way that you write?
The internet has not changed the way that I write a book, really, because I kind of, and I think every writer's different, but most writers, I think, sort of enter a zone, where you sort of shut everything out and you're alone with your words, and you don't keep windows open and constantly react to whatever's happening out there. But it certainly changed the way I write for work, the way I write online. I think you have to respond because the way people read online has changed. So you're adapting to that in a lot of ways.
Right. Has it changed the way, or do you see the internet sort of affecting the way that you interact with the authors that you interview on the podcast, or with the authors that you work with through the book review? Like, do you feel like do you feel yourself engaging with a writer's Twitter persona or something that they've said on Twitter, or thinking about that when you're working with them in any way?
For the most part, I really try to stick to the book. But I'll take one thing from the book that I wrote, which is one of the things that's gone is the blind date, right? Which is to say, if you're going to go out on a blind date, meaning someone has set you up with someone, and it wasn't Tinder and it wasn't, OkCupid or whatever, and you're being set up on a blind date, you're going to Google that person. You're going to Google the hell out of them. You're going to know all about them. You're going to know all your common contacts. You may even contact some of your common contacts and be like, oh my God, I have a blind date with Sylvia. What do you know? Blah, blah, blah. You will Google the hell out of that person. And it's the same thing when you're hiring someone, when you're meeting someone unknown for lunch. You find out all about them and you know exactly who to look for in that empty room. You and I, Lauren, have never met in real life. And yet I feel like I kind of know you. I have you here on the screen to look at. I looked at you during our little practice segment when you didn't have the same kind of setup. I looked at you in your author jacket photo. I looked at you in your Twitter profile photo, which is very different and mysterious. And I've seen your Twitter feed. And so I knew all about you. And I feel like, should I ever meet you one day in reality, I'll be like, oh my God, it's nice to finally, and I'll do that thing like, meet you, because we've already met. It's like we already know each other in many ways, even though like I actually have no idea how tall you are. I've never seen your full presence. And so I think that the way in which we're encountering people has fundamentally altered. You just really don't meet people cold anymore, unless you're just bumping into a stranger on the street or meeting them at a party.
Yeah, I was talking to my friend. I was sort of talking to some friends about this interview, and I was talking about, I was basically asking them, do you agree that X thing has disappeared or Y thing has disappeared because of the internet? And they were disagreeing with some of them. The one that I disagree with actually is they forgot my birthday, because I forget everyone's birthday all the time and I feel really bad about it. But that's just because I don't utilize the tools that are available to me, I think.
Well, it's funny. I mean, that one actually I think is a little bit coming full circle, because so the way in which I would know people's birthday is Facebook, but I am very rarely on Facebook anymore. And on those rare occasions when I go on Facebook, and also I don't maintain my contacts, which I realize is extremely undigital of me. That's one habit that I have. So people will text me and I'll just see like 718-453. And I'll be like, who the hell is this? And I will look through the text history to see, like, can I figure out who this person is? But since I don't maintain my contacts well and I don't go on Facebook, I have now come back to not knowing when people's birthdays are again. But there was a period in which I was regularly on, and also I was getting notifications all the time. And so I couldn't forget. And it's like, I haven't yet adjusted to the fact that I'm no longer getting those notifications. And now I am forgetting them again. So it may depend on how socially engaged you are with the proper tools.
Well, I also just I use my calendar now, but I really can't put like all sorts of things in the calendar. It causes me great pain. And like,
that's because you can't handwrite anymore, because like none of us can write. Like you said, penmanship, like to write things down quickly is so hard for me. I don't know like what your, hand skills are with a writing instrument, but mine are not good.
If I try to write like an actual piece of writing, or even to sort of like do a journal entry or something, I feel intense anxiety because I can't like write it as fast as I'm used to writing it when I'm typing, right? Like when you're typing, you can type faster than you think.
Yes.
And when you're writing, you have to, consider it. And I just wish that I knew what it was like before. Do you know what I mean?
Well, one thing I think this is a chapter in the book, or maybe part of a chapter which is touch typing, which, okay, I'm dating myself because we now say keyboarding, and I don't even know, like, is it touch keyboarding? But no one knows how to do that anymore. And it's because kids all learn how to, quote unquote, type well before they're instructed in school, and schools don't even instruct on this anymore. Like when I was in junior high school in 7th grade, you were all trotted in, just like you had driver's ed and shop and home economics. You took typing and you had to learn how to touch type. And I fear for the future because we all know that if you're not well positioned at a keyboard, like when you get to be a certain age, you have all kinds of creaky parts and things that happen with your hands and your fingers. And like the kids today, they're going to be in trouble when they get to the elder years, because they've never learned how to properly position their hands.
I remember, until recently, I think I was like racing people on the words per minute thing, right? And you can't do it fast if you don't do it right. But I guess it doesn't really matter. I don't know. I also I try not to have a perspective on these. I try not to have too much of a writerly perspective on things, right? But that's what we are. I'm like, well, I have to write things all the time, so that's my
Yes.
perspective.
No, we're among the word people. I mean, one thing that I do think has changed a lot is, and I got the chapter number wrong, it's chapter 71, magazines, but that I think has changed the way in which we write, because most of the magazines used to be much bigger, thicker, longer stories, more in depth. And yes, there is still long form narrative journalism that occurs on the internet. But in terms of the magazines that used to really publish that kind of work, they have gotten much slimmer, really as a direct result of advertising. So it's just a market force. And so that kind of writing, which I actually as a reader really appreciated, and as a writer really enjoyed doing, is very much diminished. I mean, if it's not entirely gone, it's on its way out.
Right. I also just want to remind everyone that you can ask questions for Pamela by putting them in the chat, and we will go through them in about 3 to 5 minutes. So if you have any, get your touch typing ready and get them in there quickly. Yeah, I mean, I used to love magazines. I used to have like stacks and stacks and stacks of magazines, and I also made lots of collages of them. And now, I'm like, please stop sending the New Yorker to my home. Thank you. I like can't take it anymore. Which is really sort of sad. Do you try not to you make some jokes in the book about how you sound like a curmudgeon or like an old man, like shouting at the cloud, but do you allow yourself to say this is objectively worse, like something is objectively worse, or do you just try and say that it's different?
I think some things are objectively worse. I do think
what's objectively worse?
Well, if we're going to talk about magazines, like I, as a teenager, I used to have the newsstands of the Upper West Side like mapped out. I knew exactly which ones got deliveries of which magazines first, and I would go to those newsstands like systematically, to get the very first copy of magazines when they came out. And I do miss that. I miss some of the sense of us all kind of being a little bit more on the same page in terms of having an understanding of what's going on in the world. Not to get too political here, but there used to be a little bit more of a kind of consensus of like, this is actually what is occurring here in this country on this day. And I think that now, that the internet, just as it is, so many different tiny little worlds that don't speak to one another, you see that understanding of, and that sense of kind of common experience dissipating. So there are some things that I kind of think are objectively sad that they're gone. Today I was thinking about, passing notes in class, and I put these notes that I've kept all my notes from school, and I don't go through them regularly. In fact, I don't think I've ever really like gone through them. But I've kept them, and I have them in this like ridiculous accordion file these brown accordion files that people remember from the days of yore. And each tab is like marked like 4th grade, 5th grade. And I just think like what a different experience it is in school. Like now, of course, you can kind of pass notes in the sense that you can be texting while your laptop is open, which most kids are on laptops during the school day. You could be texting your friends, right? But then you don't really have any kind of permanent record of that. And I was also thinking about it over the weekend because I was at the New York Historical Society. There was a symposium for Robert Caro, the biographer of Robert Moses and Lyndon Johnson. And he has given his papers to the New York Historical Society. And there's this amazing exhibit of those papers. And he talked about why he gave his papers there and what it will mean for future historians. And when you think about like this idea of these writers working today, like what will those papers consist of? Or when you go to the Pierpont Morgan Library and you see the drafts of novelists who wrote by longhand and all of the edits on the page, like now we just would have like clean Google Docs to show like, what are we going to look at in the future? Like that entire record, I think, of the process of writing, since we are in a book space here and this is a word space, hopefully this might not be of importance to everyone, but to those of us who do care about words and history and literature, that's a real loss, I think.
Yeah. Okay, my last question, and we have some audience questions. My last question is, if there were one item from your list that you could bring back Totally. What would you pick?
Oh my God, I'm gonna have to cheat and like look.
You can also
Um,
think about it and answer it at the very end if you want. I
yeah,
hate questions like this because I'm like, I can't think of anything I wrote.
I know that's like, what should I read? I'll be like, I don't know. Pick a book. Um, uh,
Yeah.
I I do think, my answer would be, you can choose. I mean, look, there are a lot of things that are more important. This is a very personal experience to me. But I do think that that feeling of being present in the moment, whether you're off traveling by yourself, whether you're sitting outside in a botanical garden for an afternoon, that feeling that there may be other things going on out there in other places, but I don't really know about it and I don't really care about it because I am here right now, that kind of Buddhist or meditative state that we would all, I think, like to achieve at least some of the time in our day. I think it's really hard to get that. You could leave your phone at home, right? But you will know that your phone is there and you will know that it is full of notifications and emails and lots of things pinging around, and you will feel its lure. I mean, they have done studies that have shown that when people sit and have a meal with their phone out, even with their phone down, they actually enjoy their food less, just having the phone there, because they know there's stuff going on, right? That's sort of happening without them. It's not so much the fear of missing out, it's that it's kind of leached away our ability. And again, maybe there are some people here who are much better at this than I am, but for me, it's leached away my ability to sort of really be in the present moment 100%, and to shut everything else out.
Yeah, I agree. So someone from the audience asks, what is nostalgia's role in thinking about the things we've lost to the internet? Do we actually miss these things, or do we would just miss the romanticized visions that we have of them in our heads? I bet it depends. It depends on the thing. Seems like we've lost her. I cannot hear. Oh, now you're
Okay, we're
oh,
suddenly
now I can
back.
hear you. You're back.
Okay, sorry about
Sorry.
that. Okay, we're here and present. We're in the moment. So I think the role of nostalgia is, again, to give us that pause to actually make a choice, right? So earlier I was talking about consumer culture and about how, like, if you're being sold a sweater or skin cream or a new financial service, like, you're a customer, you're a potential customer, you're going to take that information, that hard sell, and you're going to be skeptical and you're going to filter it out and you're going to make a decision. Like, do I actually need that sweater? Want that new pair of jeans? Do I really believe the claims that the skincare product is making? And if you don't get that thing, you're going to feel good about it, right? But with technology, the sell is so effective because what it's sort of the message that you get is, oh, you Luddite, you're not moving forward. You're not, technologically adept. You're not sort of the moment. It's a very negative message. And so I think it's harder for us to say no to these things. But my hope is that the function of this nostalgia, or even just this pause and reflection, is to think, oh, I don't actually have to do it this way. I could, I'll give another example. So I was sharing a meal with someone and they said, "Oh, I'll Zelle you the amount to split the check." And I said, "Oh, I don't use those actually. I don't use those payment apps." And the person was shocked and they were like, "Well, how do you split meals? How do you do it?" And I said, "The way I do it is that I'll treat you this time and you treat me the next time. And it's kind of nicer. Like, we each get to treat each other. And that means there's like a next time. And, it overall, I just like that more than having some new app on my phone that I don't know what data they're collecting and I don't know what fees they're charging and I don't know who's making money off me how, but this feels nicer. So I choose to do this."
Yeah, and I also feel like what you just said is a very basic thing. Like, I don't want another one on my phone. Like, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to think about like a mysterious fee right, which always comes whenever I sign up for a new Spectrum account. It's always like, oh yeah, it's $49.99 for 9 months, and then suddenly your bill is $79.99, and you're like, why is my bill $79.99?
Right. It's all in the fine print that none of us agree to. I mean, and sometimes like I'll read, like I read about an app and I thought this is a very cool app, and I think it was called iNaturalist, and I'm sure it has 20 competitors, but it's basically like you point your camera at a given plant and it will like identify it and tell you what it is. And I was like, that is really cool. I could be out having a nice walk in the woods with my kids and we'll be like, what is that? And then I could just figure it out. I have never used it. And finally, I just deleted it off my phone, because really what ends up happening is like, who wants to take out their phone like while they're walking along this nature walk and be like, let us focus in precisely. And then like, wait a minute, is it this plant? You know, I don't really actually feel like doing that. If we really want to figure out what that plant is, we can look it up when we get home. Or
and you're walking along reading it and you trip on a root and you break your ankle.
That's right. And you die.
Yeah, the internet's going to kill you. Someone else asked, so they read the excerpt of the book about unflattering photos in The Atlantic. What would you say is the importance of chaos here represented by unflattering photos that we are missing in our Instagram pictures? And they haven't asked, what are we missing? What is the role of chaos in life? But I would say, could we extrapolate from the role of chaos in Instagram pictures and also talk about the role of chaos in life?
Wow. Okay, wait, let me make sure I understand the question. So by chaos, what do you mean exactly?
I think that they are referring to, so like in the essay about unflattering photos, I assume that I didn't read the one on The Atlantic, I read the one in the book, but I assume that it's the same, more or less. You know, you talk about how there are all these sorts of like, you know, unexpected parameters or unexpected things that might happen to make your photo go wrong. And most of the photos that you're taking, which you have a roll, a film, and most of the roll sucks. Actually, you get it developed after you've painstakingly taken your 36 or 24 photos, and you're like, oh man, like 3 of these are good, and this one has my finger in it, and this one the girl is like crossing her eyes somehow, and like this one, like that isn't what my friend Ben looks like at all, you know. And I think they're asking, so what are we losing by losing that kind of like chaotic randomness?
I mean, so many things actually, and it depends on, you know, your age and sort of, you know, but we're losing reality is one thing. I mean, you know, it's interesting, like there was a movement in fashion magazines against the touching up of photos, the kind of relentless thinning of thighs and, you know, washing out of skin imperfections and all of that kind of thing. And there was an effort towards creating something somewhat more approaching normalcy in terms of body size and, you know, the myriad imperfections of humanity. And yet, like with Instagram and with taking photos, you'll take, like, if you ask someone to take a picture of you now, like if you're at a scenic view and you're like, oh, can you take this photo of us? They will, like, just as a force of habit, because they're on your phone, they'll take like 20 and they'll be like, here you go. Because they know that like in, you know, 15 of them, someone's eyes are going to be closed. And so you can actually choose and find like the perfect photo from that. But that's the way we approach everything, right? Like we're taking so many photos and then we're editing it down. We're taking away the imperfections and the chaos of regular life. And we are creating this image that is again, not reality. And I would say, like, what do we lose on a more profound level? And to get to that age point, like, when you look at the headlines around Facebook and Instagram and the effects that it has on teenage girls in terms of producing feelings of inadequacy and low self-esteem and anxiety, it's because the images that they confront online are often so perfect, so idealized, that they then become, you know, insecure and feel bad about themselves. And well, you know, we're all doing it to ourselves.
Right. And I think one's tendency when asked this kind of question, and you didn't do it, but it's to say, you know, like there's something really wonderful that will come out of those bad pictures, right? Like you'll get a really wonderfully bad picture, and you sort of write about this a bit, right? Like you're like, I can't remember in what chapter you're writing about this, but you say something about how like, oh, you can now pick the picture that has like the sort of wackiest, quirkiest, like makes you seem good natured, and it's like kind of, it's like the worst picture, but it makes you look humble.
Right. It's like you cute being like, but you look adorable,
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, some of my favorite photos from childhood are like, I grew up with 7 brothers and I was always like incredibly bored at some little league game or just like at some outing that I really did not want to be at. And of course, at the time it was kind of miserable, but now it makes me laugh looking back at these photos of me just being like, God damn it, like,
Yeah.
really unhappy. That was my childhood. I like to see it.
And then this is going to be our last question, which is a good one. What do you think about the rise of book clubs and the popularity of book club recommendation lists on the internet?
I think it's fantastic.
Really?
I think it's fantastic. Yeah, I do. I think it's great that readers can connect with one another. That's something I think is actually really amazing. I think it's great. If you talk about sort of positive ways in which kids can interact online, like, when I was a kid, I was into various series and things, and I was like the only one that I knew of. I didn't commiserate with other kids. We didn't exchange like recommendations of books and talk about them. I think that the whole act of reading with series and with popular authors has become much more communal than it was. Like, even if like my entire school were Beverly Cleary fans, like me, I didn't know it, but now they would all connect online. They would all be able to like know that about themselves and know that, have that communal experience. I think it's also incredibly powerful for readers of any age to like be able to connect with an author in some way, to come to this. Like, not everyone here lives in New York. I'm assuming there are people here from around the country and possibly outside of this country, and they get to come into this little room we have here and get a chance to interact with you and decide they want to read your novel or to think about, the book review or whatever it might be. And that's a kind of connection that you never had before the internet. So I actually think that is a real force for the good.
Are there any downsides for authors? Like, are you going to be looking at your Goodreads reviews, Pamela?
Look, there are so many downsides for authors. I don't need to be looking for them. Yeah, I mean, I think that you can become too reactive, and I think that I remember there was a story as a journalist that I wrote in the early days of the internet, and it went online on a major magazine's website. I was so proud of this story. And if it had been before the internet, I would have picked up a copy of the magazine. I would have been like, yay, I have my copy. And some people I know would have been like, that was a great story. But instead I went into the message board, into the comments board. And at that time it was totally unmoderated. And people were like, die, and I was like, oh my God, it's hard to be exposed to all of that opinion. And, the anonymity of the internet sort of, it's freeing in both good and bad ways.
Right. I don't know what the answer is, because I also, when my book came out, I was really sort of like pleasantly surprised by the Bookstagram community, such as it is. If it's a community, like, it's really diverse and interesting, and a lot of the things that they say are really interesting. And it's a lot of people who either don't have or don't necessarily want like a professional outlet for doing book criticism, but they have a lot of interesting things to say. But then also some people are really mean.
Yeah.
And they tag you in it, and it's really rude.
Yeah,
to your
it's
point
a low
about
lift.
social cues and manners.
It's a low lift to say something mean about someone online. Whereas in the early days, for someone to go down to a bookstore reading and like come wait all the way, get to the front of the line and be like, your book sucks. Like, people are just not going to invest that kind of time.
But that's amazing. I would be really impressed by that.
Next book, Lauren.
Next one, when we have in-person reading.
Right, when we're in real life again, we can enjoy those experiences.
Well, I think that we're out of time. So I would just say thank you so much, and buy the book. It's a really great, nice thing that you can read through all the way if you maintain your attention span, or you can read in chapter by chapter in little bits if you suffer from Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, Reddit addiction, as some of us do. And also just a reminder that next week is an event with Penn with Sandra Cisneros. So if you enjoyed tonight, you might enjoy that next week. And I think that's all for me. Do you have any final parting words? Yeah.
No, I just want to say thank you. I want to thank our ASL interpreters. I want to thank our translators, and Lauren and the Strand and Penn. So thank you all. And all of you. Thanks for coming to this screen.
Yes, it's been great.